Didn't cry, I didn't argue. I just stood there for a moment, looking at the place card with my name on it, and I almost laughed. Almost. The card was positioned at the far end of the reception hall, right next to the gift table. Not near my cousins, not near my parents, not near any of the friends I'd grown up with, people I'd known my whole life. Right next to the pile of wrapped presents and envelopes, in a corner that nobody visits except to drop something off and walk away. My brother was getting married that afternoon. It was supposed to be one of the happiest days our family had seen in years, and I had been seated like a coat rack. I picked up the card and read my name again, just to make sure I hadn't misread it. I hadn't. I set it back down carefully, smoothed the front of my dress, and went to find a glass of water. That's it. No scene. No confrontation. I just needed a minute to breathe. Let me back up, because none of this happened in a vacuum. Growing up, I was the middle child in a family of three. My older brother, the one getting married that day, had always been the golden one. Good grades, popular, went to the right school, got the right job, married the right woman. My younger sister was the baby, the one everyone worried about and fussed over. And then there was me. I was the one who quietly figured things out on her own. I was the one who left our small town in Ohio at 22 with 2 suitcases and a job offer in Chicago that I had found entirely by myself. I was the one who built something from nothing, without asking anyone for help, without a safety net, without applause. My family never quite knew what to do with that. My mother's version of love was comparison. Every phone call home ended with some variation of "your brother just got promoted" or "your sister finally found a good guy." She didn't mean to be cruel, I think. She just didn't have another language. My father was quieter about it, but his silences said plenty. He'd ask about my brother's new house in detail, square footage and kitchen renovations and the view from the back deck. And then he'd ask me how the job thing was going. Like what I did was still provisional, still subject to revision, still something I might outgrow. The job thing. I had been running my own consulting firm for 4 years by then. I had built it from a single client I'd taken on while still working full-time. Stayed up past midnight 3 nights a week for 8 months, until I had enough of a book of business to go out on my own. My company helped mid-sized businesses restructure their operations. The kind of work that isn't glamorous to explain at family dinners, but that paid very well and that I was genuinely good at. By the time my brother's wedding came around, I had 14 employees and a client list that included 2 publicly traded companies. My family knew none of this, not because I hid it, because they never asked. My sister-in-law, I'll call her what she was by the time of the wedding, even though part of me still flinches, had never liked me. That sounds petty to say out loud, but it's just the truth. From the first time my brother brought her home, she'd had a way of looking at me that I recognized immediately. It was the look of someone doing a calculation. She was very beautiful and very conscious of it, and she had learned early in life that status was something you managed, curated, protected. I didn't fit neatly into the image she was building. I wasn't married. I didn't have a traditional career with a title she could drop into conversation. I dressed simply. I didn't perform. She'd made small comments over the years, nothing you could point to directly. Just little adjustments, little diminishments. At Thanksgiving, 2 years before the wedding, she'd introduced me to her friends as my fiancé's sister. She does some kind of business consulting thing. At Christmas, she'd asked me in front of everyone if I was still doing that freelance stuff, and then turned away before I could answer. Once, and I've never forgotten this, she told my mother that she hoped I'd find my footing soon because it was so hard to watch someone still figuring things out in their 30s. I was 31. I had 8 employees at the time. I said nothing. My brother knew she did these things. I could tell by the way he'd get very quiet right after and then change the subject a little too loudly. He never said anything to her. He never said anything to me either. Not to apologize, not to acknowledge it, not to say he'd seen it and it wasn't okay. He just changed the subject and moved on, and after a while I understood that his silence was its own kind of answer. So when I arrived at the wedding venue that Saturday afternoon, a renovated barn outside of Columbus that cost more per hour than I billed most clients, and found my name card next to the gift table, I wasn't entirely surprised. I was hurt in the way you're hurt, when you've almost prepared yourself for something and it still lands harder than you expected. I stood there for a long moment. The hall was filling up. A string quartet was playing softly near the entrance. The gifts were stacked neatly behind me, bows and ribbons catching the light. I could see the main tables from where I stood. Round tables dressed in cream linen, centerpieces of white peonies. Little gold votives everywhere. I could see my parents' seats, near the front, close to the sweetheart table. I could see my cousin's family, my mother's sister and her husband and their two daughters, all placed together at a table near the windows. And there I was, in the corner, next to the presents. I found my mother before the ceremony started. She was getting her lipstick touched up in the hallway, and she saw me coming and gave me a smile that was already slightly apologetic before I'd said a word, which told me she knew exactly where I'd been seated. "Mom," I said, "did you see the seating chart?" She adjusted the neckline of her dress. "Sweetheart, it was a lot of people to organize. I'm next to the gift table. There weren't a lot of auctions, Mom." She looked at me. "Your brother and she wanted to make sure the important guests were at the main tables. There was limited space. Important guests." I let that sit for a second. "I've been coming to every family event for 31 years, I said. "I flew in from Chicago for this. I sent them a gift that was more than what most people at those main tables gave combined, and I'm sitting next to the presents." My mother had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It's just seating, honey. It's not just seating and you know it." She didn't answer. She looked at the floor, and I saw something in her face that was almost guilt, but not quite enough of it to do anything about. She straightened up, looked back at the mirror, and said, "Let's just get through today. Let's just get through today." That had been our family's philosophy for as long as I could remember. Don't make a fuss. Don't cause a scene. Just get through it. I nodded and walked away. I sat in my assigned seat. I watched my brother get married. He looked happy. She looked beautiful. The ceremony was lovely, and I cried a little, genuinely, because whatever had happened between us and whatever was happening now, he was still my brother and I had loved him our whole lives. That part was real, and I didn't let what was happening around me take that from me. The reception was where it got harder. I sat at my corner table through cocktail hour watching the room. People drifted by to deposit gifts and didn't look at me. A server stopped once to ask if I needed anything, and I got the distinct impression he thought I was some kind of volunteer. My aunt, my mother's sister, caught my eye from across the room and gave me a look of such naked pity that I had to glance away. When the meal was served, a plate arrived at my table with slightly less care than the others. I noticed. You notice things like that when you're already watching. My sister-in-law made her rounds during dinner, the way new brides do, stopping at each table, laughing, accepting compliments. She came to every table in the room. She did not come to mine. My brother made it to my corner once, briefly, on his way to somewhere else. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Hey, you good?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Great. You look great." And kept moving. 45 seconds, maybe. That was it. Near the end of the dinner, one of her bridesmaids, a woman I'd met once before, years ago, sat down across from me. I think she'd had a glass too many of champagne because she leaned in with the conspiratorial warmth of someone who thinks they're being kind, and said she told us she didn't want anyone to, lower energy at the main tables. She wanted everyone there to be like a good match for the vibe. She said it like it was a reasonable thing to say. Like energy was a polite way to say whatever she meant to say. Then she got up, looked at the gift table, added, "Oh, someone's supposed to be keeping track of who brought what, right? For the thank you cards?" and wandered off. I sat very still. Keeping track of who brought what. I thought about the 4 years of late nights. The clients I had cold called. The team I had hired and trained and fought to keep. The contract I'd signed 3 weeks before the wedding that was the largest my company had ever landed. A restructuring engagement with a regional logistics company that would run for 18 months and bring in just under $2 million. I thought about all of it, quietly, in my corner next to the gift table, and I made a decision. I didn't make it in anger. That's the thing I want you to understand. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying in a bathroom. I was very calm, the way you get calm when something becomes clear. I opened my phone, found a number in my contacts, and sent a message. Short. No explanation. Hey, the consulting retainer we've been discussing with my brother's company. Don't move forward. I'll explain later. I put my phone away. Some context. My brother's company, the one he built over 6 years and was enormously proud of, had been struggling for about a year. He'd told me about it at Christmas, unusually candid. A little worried. Cash flow issues. Operational inefficiencies he couldn't seem to solve. He'd mentioned, almost offhand, that he wished he knew someone in restructuring consulting. I hadn't said anything right then, but 2 weeks later I'd reached out through a mutual contact, quietly, without telling him it was me arranging it, and had connected his company with one of my senior consultants for a preliminary engagement. The retainer they'd been about to sign was worth $140,000 over 6 months, with a likelihood of extending. I had done it because he was my brother. Because despite everything, I still loved him, because I had a skill set that could genuinely help him, and it had seemed like the right thing to do. I canceled it from a folding chair next to a pile of wedding presents. The next morning, I flew back to Chicago. I didn't say a dramatic goodbye. I hugged my parents, congratulated my brother and his new wife, and left. I had a flight to catch. 3 weeks passed. Then my brother called. I almost didn't pick up. But I did. Hey, he said. He sounded tired. I wanted to ask you about something. The consulting thing kind of fell apart, and I'm trying to figure out why. They said the referral was withdrawn? It was, I said. A pause. Do you know anything about that? I arranged it, I said. And then I withdrew it. The silence on the line was different from his usual silences. You, what? I set up the referral, quietly, because you mentioned you were having trouble and I thought I could help. And you pulled it? Why? I let a beat go by. I let a beat go by. Because of the seating chart, among other things. He went very quiet. I've watched her treat me like I don't matter for years, I said. I didn't say anything. I kept showing up. I kept being your sister, and then at your wedding, the one I flew in for, the one I gave generously for, I got put next to the gift table while she told her bridesmaids she wanted good energy at the main tables. I paused. I'm not doing that anymore. It was just a seating chart, he said, and the fact that those were the exact words my mother had used told me something about how this family talked to itself. I know you believe that, I said, but I don't. He got defensive after that, the way people do when they can't argue the substance, so they argue the tone. I was being cold. I was being calculating. I was making his wedding about me. I listened to all of it without raising my voice. When he was done, I said, I love you. I'm not trying to punish you. But I'm done making myself small so other people are comfortable. He hung up. 6 weeks later, I got a call from my mother. She'd heard everything by then. Her version of it, anyway, filtered through my brother and his wife. She called to tell me I owed them an apology. For what exactly, I asked. For sabotaging his business over a seating arrangement. I almost laughed again. That word, sabotaging. Like I had done something to them, rather than simply stopped doing something for them. I didn't sabotage anything, I said. I withdrew a referral I had arranged voluntarily. That's my right. You did it out of spite. I did it because I was tired, I said, and that was the most honest thing I'd said to any of them in years. I've been tired for a long time, Mom. She didn't know what to do with that. She asked me if I was seeing a therapist, which I think was her way of suggesting the problem was in my perception and not in anything they'd actually done. I told her I was fine. I told her I loved her. And I told her that I wasn't going to keep having a version of this conversation where my feelings were the problem to be solved. The call with my sister-in-law happened about a month after that. She called from a number I didn't recognize, which told me she'd assumed I'd blocked her. I hadn't, but the fact that she assumed I had told me she knew what she'd done. She opened with pleasantries that lasted about 45 seconds before she got to the point. which was that the consulting arrangement had fallen through and her husband was stressed and she wanted to understand why I'd created this situation. Created this situation? I asked her to tell me honestly, and I meant it. I wasn't being aggressive. I genuinely wanted to know why she had put my name card next to the gift table. A pause. There were limited seats. At a venue with 230 guests, I said, and you couldn't find a chair for your husband's sister that wasn't next to the coat rack and the presents. Another pause. I didn't realize it would be such a big deal to you. Why not? The silence stretched. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. I think you knew exactly how it would feel, I said. I think you've known for years what you've been doing. The comments, the introductions, the way you talk about my work. I think you saw someone you couldn't fit into your image and you decided to manage her. And I'm telling you now, clearly, so there's no confusion, I'm not available to be managed. She started to say something about family and how these things were complicated, and she'd never meant I don't need an apology. I said, I don't need anything from you. I just needed to say that out loud, to you, once. I wasn't cruel about it. I wasn't cold, I was just clear. We haven't spoken since. My brother and I talk occasionally now. Brief, careful conversations, the kind where you can feel both people trying to figure out the shape of something that used to be simpler. It's not what I would have chosen, but I'm also not going to pretend it's okay when it isn't. Not anymore. Not after 31 years of pretending. My parents are working through it in the way my parents work through things, which is slowly and without much direct acknowledgement. My mother called me on my birthday and didn't mention any of it, and that was its own kind of peace offering, and I accepted it. My company is doing well. Better than well, honestly. We landed 2 new clients in the quarter after the wedding, and the 18-month logistics engagement I mentioned. That's going strong. I have a team I trust, work I'm proud of, and a life I built from scratch, on my own, without a single piece of recognition from the people who were supposed to cheer the loudest. I've thought a lot about that. The absence of recognition and what it does to you over time. How you start to measure yourself and other people's silence. How you keep showing up, keep extending yourself, keep arranging consulting referrals for brothers who seat you next to the gift table, because somewhere underneath all of it you still believe that if you do enough, give enough, help enough, eventually they'll see you. They might not see you. That's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. And you have to decide at some point whether you're going to keep waiting. I'm not waiting anymore. That's not bitterness, I want to be clear about that. I still love my family, I still show up for the things that matter. I still show up for the things that matter. I still answer the phone, but I show up as myself now, fully, without trimming myself down to fit someone else's seating chart. If that makes me harder to place, then so be it. The corner next to the gift table was the last place I let anyone put me. I've thought about that seating card a lot since then. A small rectangle of cardstock with my name on it, placed next to a pile of ribbon-wrapped boxes in a corner where nobody lingers. It sounds almost too small to matter. And that's exactly why it did. The things that break something open in you are rarely the big dramatic moments. They're the small, deliberate ones. The ones someone chose carefully and then looked you in the eye and called insignificant. My sister-in-law didn't seat me in that corner by accident. She did it because she had decided somewhere along the way that I was the kind of person you could do that to. And for years I had let her believe that. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not what she did. What I allowed over and over by staying quiet. There's a kind of integrity that doesn't announce itself. It's not the kind that makes speeches or demands apologies. It's the kind that simply refuses, one day, to keep pretending that something is fine when it isn't. I'd spent a long time telling myself that keeping the peace was the honorable thing, that absorbing the small humiliations was maturity. But there's a difference between being the bigger person and disappearing yourself entirely. I had crossed that line so gradually I hadn't noticed, until I was standing in a corner next to someone else's wedding gifts, being mistaken for a volunteer. What I did next wasn't revenge exactly. I withdrew something I had given freely, because the people I'd given it to had made clear Not with words, but with every small action over years, that they didn't actually see me. You can't keep extending yourself toward people who have decided you aren't worth seeing. That's not loyalty, that's just erosion. I think about what it took to build the company I built. Not the strategy of it, not the financials, the daily, unglamorous endurance of it. The mornings I didn't want to make the call but made it anyway. The months where I didn't know if it would work and worked anyway. That kind of persistence doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from having decided at some point that what you're building is worth protecting, including yourself. And I think the clearest-headed thing I did through all of it, including the fallout with my family, was refuse to confuse love with self-abandonment. I still love my brother. I still love my parents. That didn't change, but love that requires you to sit in the corner and not mention it isn't really love. It's a transaction, and a bad one. The consequences of that one canceled contract rippled out in ways I couldn't have scripted, not because I planned them that way, but because actions have weight, and when you finally act in alignment with what you actually believe, things shift. My family had to reckon with the fact that their treatment of me had had a cost. I had to reckon with the fact that I'd been accepting that treatment long past the point where I should have said something. Neither of those reckonings was comfortable. But I'd rather have the discomfort of honesty than the comfort of a corner. The last thing I want to say is this. Nobody is coming to move your place card. If you're sitting somewhere that doesn't reflect who you are, you have to be the one to stand up. Quietly, if you want, without a speech. But you have to stand up. That's what the corner next to the gift table taught me, and I'm grateful for it, in the way you're grateful for the things that finally make something clear.